What's up, y'all? Welcome to Better on the Inside, a podcast about working for a church, going to a church, being the church, serving a church without losing your soul. That's the important part. My name is John, and I'm your digital pastor and host, and being a part of that. I'm so thankful that you're joining us, and I really want to help be a guide on this journey, wherever you are on your spiritual journey. Today, I talked to Eugene Kim, who is the founder and really he would probably object to this, but the brains behind the New Wine Collective, which is a different way of looking at the church. And as a former pastor, he has, I say a former pastor, as somebody who was formerly in kind of the evangelical megachurch world, this is a really cool way to kind of reinterpret and relook at what a new model for church can kind of be. And part of the conversation that I love having here about how to make the church better on the inside is sometimes looking at different models, right? There are a lot of different ways to do church. And so we want to learn more about those things and embrace the right things from those. So I love my conversation with Eugene. He is an awesome dude, and I'm so glad to have met him and be a part of the New Wine Collective. You can look up the New Wine Collective, newwinecollective.org, and you could just search that and find it in Google, or you can go to the website and find all of their socials. Subscribe to their newsletter and be a part of their Third Thursday events, which are really cool. So if you like this podcast, which I hope you do, subscribe and rate us 5 stars. You could share it with your friends. That's another cool way to do this. Listen to my conversation with Eugene. It is really awesome. What's up, y'all? I am here with Eugene Kim of the New Wine Collective. Honestly, a dream guest for the podcast. Eugene, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah. So we have not met in real life, but we have traveled circles on Twitter, and you're somebody that I follow, and I subscribe to the newsletter. I missed the Thursday thing, by the way, the Third Thursday thing. I need to get back on that. But will you tell people a little bit about what the New Wine Collective is and how it came about?
All right. I'll start with how it came about. I've been a pastor for over 25 years, mostly in evangelical spaces. But in 2020, I left my role as a pastor and I started this nonprofit. Essentially to kind of do the work of study, ideation, have lots of conversations about how we do church. I wanted to ask deeper questions about what church is and how we do it and what it's for. So essentially, it's a kind of a think tank for ecclesiology, and trying to rethink and reimagine how we do church and spirituality from the ground up.
Oh, that's awesome. A think tank. That's so cool. And that is something that, as a practitioner, as a pastor, you rarely get, and the phrase at our work and everybody's work when you work in the ministry often is Sunday's coming, right? And so you got to produce something, and there's a lot of practicing of it, but there's not always a lot of time to reflect. And so it's really cool that you have a chance to get the time to reflect. And so that question asking, that curiosity is something that I've seen that is so often missing from our church spaces, a curiosity. And it's like, no, we got the answers. And so as in asking that question, what are you seeing? Like, what are the results of asking that question and the thinking that you're doing right now?
That's a great question. A lot of the work actually started when I was in church. I felt like there was this real deep desire among those of us who are leading church, like, oh man, okay, this is working, but kind of not at the same time. Right. And I wish we could just kind of pause, take a step back. And, of course, we're just using the playbook that everyone else has. We're just doing doing church the way that has been passed down to us. That's and, right. We can make little tweaks here and there, and we would have these conversations like, hey, I think we need to kind of pull back, do less so that we can get a bird's eye view and see the bigger picture here. Like, is this working? But like you said, Sunday kept coming. The fall kept coming. The next season kept coming. Yep. Lent kept coming. And there was just very little space and time to do the deeper questions and, kind of big picture stuff. So, there are a lot of factors that kind of led to my transition out of my role. But I think I found that the questions that I've been sort of sitting with for years, I finally have the space and time to think about them. Is this working? Are people really becoming more like Jesus? And you know, so yeah, we can go in
Yeah,
to
let's
some
go
of.
in, man. Let's go in.
Okay, yeah, all right. Um, so I think just something to uh, kind of share some background. The last church that I served at, I was there for 17 years.
Wow.
And, it was like our whole lives, really. But
Mm,
it started out as a pretty small startup church. And we were able to grow the church into a pretty well established one, at least for our area. We're in the Boston
yeah.
area.
Okay.
Churches out here don't generally get too big,
Sure.
but we did, I think, a pretty good job. We did our best. And so the church went, pretty well. We planted churches, we did multi-campus, multi-site, and pretty much every model we tried it. And on the outside, it looks like we're kind of winning, right? We're growing, we're expanding, but I think anyone who has worked inside church, we all kind of know, like, okay, the inside is it could be going well, but there's
Mm,
also some compromises, and
yeah.
people burn out, um, and you ask questions like, is it really working? And of course, like there are all these like studies now, that talk about, how about like 90 something percent of growth is now mostly transfer growth. It's just people coming
Right.
from other churches. It's basically people who are pre-trained to like
Mm,
this form.
mm.
It's Boston, so it's a very transit city. And so these are people who are going to Google church near me,
Yeah.
and they're going to,
Yeah.
they're going to end up somewhere.
Right.
And just because we have happen to have a, pretty decent show on Sundays and we have a good children's ministry, they're going to come. And so, I was just becoming more and more aware that the things that I was valuing weren't really aligning with the things I was spending 80, 90% of my time doing.
Wow.
I want to value more face to face discipleship and empowerment. But we were, running an organization.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's a lot to it. And so, um, yeah, majority of people coming, they were, okay, real talk, like, they're coming and they're wonderful people, but they are mostly passively consuming and
Hmm.
just sort of dependent on the organization to
Yeah.
organize their spiritual lives.
Mm,
So pastorally, I started to see like this is not ideal. This is
right.
perhaps not the way, it's clearly not the way Jesus did it. And so what do we make of all of these structures and kind of organizational and programmatic aspects that we've sort of
Yeah.
grown, and the whole system has become quite bloated.
Right.
And I was feeling the weight of that bloat.
Mm,
I'd gone through several seasons of burnout in ministry.
yeah.
So let me pause there. I
Uh,
just love to get your
yeah.
thoughts.
Of course you're feeling it. Like because
Mm-hmm.
it's very there's a passive consumption that's very dependent on you to direct the I like the phrase trickle down spirituality, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like as long as you're spiritual and you're directing that down to people, they're receiving something, but that puts a lot of weight on you. And inevitably, when you marry a spiritual community in a 501c3 organization, something is going to win because you can
Yep.
only have a highest priority when it comes to some of these decisions. So, how are we going to do a worship service or how are we going to do small groups? A lot of times, the decision making is driven by the 501c3, which is much more focused on efficiency and reproducing successful things versus the spiritual community, which is inefficient. It's illogical a lot of times because it's very individual. And
Mm-hmm.
once you grow a church to a certain size, you can't pastor all those people. And so you
Mm-mm.
have to create systems to pastor people. And you can raise up disciples to pastor other people and all of that. But if they're under a system, it's still kind of trending towards the 501c3. So that's a lot of weight to carry for somebody who wants to be a pastor versus the CEO of a 501c3 organization.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I was just, more and more aware, on any given Sunday, you might be preaching a message and it's just a one size fits all, message that's not going to resonate with everyone. It's sort of, but yet we pour so much of our time and resource into this, container where everyone sits in rows and like listens to one person dominate the conversation.
Yeah.
And I was always aware, I go downstairs in the basement, the teens are down there, they're on their phones. And I'm like, of course, like it makes sense. Like I'm not speaking to them.
Yeah.
This is in a very costly, inefficient way to do spiritual conversation. And so we're trying to one size fits all everything. And so
Wow.
I think it worked for a lot of people, but it clearly didn't work for everyone. It doesn't work for everyone. And so I think the church in general is sort of realizing, oh, okay, like this container, this model, maybe it worked really well. And it was designed for a certain place and time, but we're no longer in that place and time.
Yeah.
Churches are no longer these like homogenous, well, most of them, they're not these like homogenous spaces. They're becoming more diverse. And so how do you meet the needs of a diverse population with one size fits all programs?
Brother, the thing that you just said that got me all like, and if you're listening and not watching, like I'm making like tapping my head and like doing mind blown stuff, because you talk about how the one size fits all model is very efficient as a business model, right? This church model that we're in is very efficient in terms of processing people and moving people through certain processes. But you said spiritually inefficient. And what resonated with me about that is it's not meeting that deep spiritual need, not the surface behavior level need, the deep spiritual need that you see in people. It can't dig down to that level because it has to be applicable to an audience of everybody. And the idea that any system is spiritually inefficient should be deeply troubling to pastors. Meaning if it's not doing what we want to do, which is like, and you could define the mission anyway, right? For our church, it's so that all people can believe and thrive in Jesus. Thriving isn't going to happen in this one size fits all kind of big container where you're throwing big thoughts that apply to as many people as possible. Thriving comes from a depth that's a little bit of a deeper spiritual connection, and you can't do that. And so I could understand why that would be difficult and troubling and something you wanted to investigate.
Yeah. I think, it really stemmed from my own spiritual journey too. The ways that I've experienced transformation and healing and growth really were from these like face-to-face relationships and encountering even new voices. And so the expectation that our very content, leader-driven model, it's sort of like you're trying to hit the lowest common denominator, in the room, so to speak.
Right.
And I'm realizing like, people are coming with all different kinds of needs at different points in their spiritual journey. They are speaking different vocabulary, they're in even different developmental spaces, right?
Yes.
And, I love sermons, I have nothing against sermons. I just think that there's an imbalance in the business model of church. We've sort of majored in content delivery and assume like give people the right information and that will lead to transformation. But some sermons do that, right?
Yes.
Some sermons can have like a really profound effect, but the majority do not. Let's be honest. Right?
Yeah.
But it's really, I think we're designed to be healed and formed through face-to-face relationships. It's through mirroring. It's through being loved and feeling safe. It's much more of a holistic process than just, depositing information into our brains every week that you're going to forget about 3 days later.
Well, absolutely. And part of what I love about your perspective is that you are so kind to the church and so kind to folks who are doing it in the way that you saw was spiritually inefficient and didn't settle well with your soul, but you're still very kind to folks because I think you have a lot of empathy for them. But you just talked about delivering information. Like a sermon that changes your life is like a hole in one. Like it's one of those things that they do go to, over time, these sermons do go to a good place and kind of help form you and do all that. But a sermon that truly changes you is really like a hole in one. Like
Totally.
if you've been a Christian for 20 years, how many sermons can you remember? But the common denominator in spiritual growth for pretty much everybody that I've ever talked to is relational. It's a person or a group of people that helped change their life and walked beside them and being a part of something. It's not like, hey, I heard this sermon and my life changed. It's very much like I became connected to this person or these people, and then everything changed.
Yes. I that is absolutely right. And like while I was a pastor, we would have all these conversations, how do we shift the emphasis from content to connection, right? How do we empower people? How do we have them sit less in rows facing forward and more turned toward each other?
Right.
But one of the things I realized is it's really hard to change an established large complex system.
Yes.
When it's got all these interlocking pieces. So change is very slow and difficult. So zooming out, it seems like the conversation today is like, okay, is this model really working? Religious affiliation is in decline. The past few years have been wild. And is the model of church that, is sort of the dominant model, is it able to adapt? Is it flexible enough for the world that we're living in now, that is increasingly diverse, increasingly connected? Wow. People can get content anytime, anywhere. So why are we spending 80% of our time and resource on more content? Yeah. And so there's just a lot of mismatch, I think, in our strategy, and just kind of what's happening in the world in general. So I've just been watching all that, trying to observe it, trying to understand, and put into words what is this like gap that I'm feeling in my soul? Like, is this really gonna work? And I think my observation is that it works. It works for some people, but it's working for fewer and fewer people with every generation. And so now is the time to start, innovating and trying new things and kind of reevaluate things at a deeper level, and not just repackage the same old thing and new branding or whatever it is. But actually talk about what are the models that are going to make better sense for the world we live in.
Ooh, that's a whole word right there. Like you could have a whole, oh man, I'm so excited. Okay. So those things that you're talking about, new models, what are some of the things you're seeing that the church can do to adapt to a complex, ever-changing world? What are some of the things that, because we have people who are listening that are just part of a church, that are just hanging out. We have leaders, we have all sorts of kinds of people listening. What are some of the things that people can do to embrace, not slapping a label on something new, but to actually transform the way we're doing church? What are some of the takeaways that you have so far?
Yeah. Oh man. There's so much to that question. So first of all, I'm not going to say that every church needs to change. If it works, great, do it. If it's a place where people can find genuine connection and spiritual relationships, and it's a place where they feel loved and they can belong and they're growing, wonderful. That's great. I think it helps to have awareness that the way we do church now is not it. It's not the only way. It was never the only way, right? All throughout history, the church is always changing, right? And so I believe we're kind of living through this such a time as this where the church
Yeah.
is changing. That's kind of a given at this point. So it's not saying every church has to change. It's more like when you step back from it, there are certain models and forms of church that kind of don't work as well for the culture that we're in. And out of that emerge new movements and new forms and new models. I think we don't pause generally to realize like, hey, the way we do church right now is really new. Like this 501c3 business with,
that's true.
platforms and stages and even like AV equipment. We couldn't do the stuff that we do now, like even 100 years ago, right? It's all innovation. At some point in history, everything that the church has done was innovative, right? Pews, pulpits, it was all innovative at one point.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't be afraid.
Scripture. Yeah, like
we shouldn't be afraid.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was all new at one point. And so, and I think we're just having greater awareness because of like technology and study of history. Like, oh, okay, you get some perspective here that it's okay to try new things. And so in my view, the important question is really getting down to the root of things. Like, what is the essence of what it means to be the church? What is that core essence? So I go back to Acts 2. I go back to sort of what the church looked like. And we have to understand there's a natural progression that happens. You start out organic, small, grassroots, sort of challenges the status quo. But as that movement grows, it needs to get more organized. And so you start to kind of have more set roles and, rituals and traditions. And then you need institutions and organizations to preserve those traditions. And then it starts to become this larger, complex machine, and then becomes an institution. And then the institution starts to say, hey, this is the right way to do it. And it starts to exclude, and it starts to, become stagnant and even oppressive and resist new thinking and innovation.
Yeah.
And whenever this happens, it's just this whole cycle. Whenever this happens, of course, the people for whom the system never worked in the first place, they're in the margins, and they're there and they're thinking, hey, we need something new because the system doesn't work for us. It has excluded us. It has ignored us. It has oppressed us.
Yeah.
And so this is where new movements get birthed, usually in the margins, and they grow and challenge the status quo, and they innovate. And they, there's a lot of pioneers in this space. And so we see this cycle all throughout church history. And here we are again. Yeah. We're at the stage where the dominant form of at least Christianity in the United States has reached this institutional, kind of, you said it yourself, the industrial Christian complex.
Yeah.
And I have no interest in like trying to like throw bombs or like tear anything down. I'm just saying like this doesn't work for everyone, and it's working for fewer and fewer people. And so we need innovators and pioneers, usually in the margins, to start, exercising their creativity, getting back to our roots, starting back at the organic kind of level. And so you can do that outside of the institution. You can even do it inside the institution. You can create, R&D labs. You can run experiments. You can, so there's no one right way to do it. But I really believe that we're in a time where we need more people who are trying to practice things in a different way.
Yeah. Well, some of what you said is so cool because the church in Acts, to me, reads as those passages of scripture are descriptive, not prescriptive. Meaning it's not saying every church for all the time needs to do this. It's just telling you how it went. And there's even cycles in that. In that, like in this initial cycle, you've got Jesus and his followers, the 11 that are left, and they're largely Jewish and they're kind of hanging out and staying where they are. And then you have an outsider like Paul who comes in and completely disrupts that cycle and goes to the Gentiles and makes it real messy for the church. Like the church got real, I shouldn't say got real neat, but the church got neater and got more institutionalized just in those first few years post Jesus. And then you have Paul comes in and he flips the cycle. And then, okay, we got to have a Jerusalem council because we got to talk about, do these people have to become Jewish? No. Okay. We're going to keep going. And it's all part of the mission. And so you even see that cycle play out in scripture of, hey, Jesus is like, go to, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And they kind of got stalled out at Judea to start.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be this reinvention of the whole thing. And to your point about growing, we've got these original disciples and there's more people coming to the church. And it's like, okay, we need people who are going to help feed the widows. And there's discrimination going on here. And this wasn't part of what Jesus had us do because that wasn't part of the thing. And so it's growing and it's different. And so as it changes, you have to hit this cycle. And I think that is so healthy because so much of institutionalization that you talked about is keeping everything the same. Is protecting the thing, and God kind of works in seasons generally, right? And so you see cycles of nature, you see cycles of whatever. And so I get excited when you talk about voices on the margins inspiring the change of what needs to happen, because I think you see it in scripture. I think that's scriptural. I think the voices of the widows, right? What were they? The Hellenistic Jewish widows is part of what changed the church. And they were on the margins. Those were the least, right? And that changes the nature of the church and how we do it today. So I think the call for voices on the margins is significant.
And that's exactly what Jesus is. The kingdom he proclaimed was really centered on, right? I mean, he came and this kingdom is up, it flipped everything upside down, right? This was a time when the religious institution, it was empowered. It was, they controlled people's spiritual life.
Yeah.
Jesus comes and disrupts that whole system. And he says the kingdom is near. It's everywhere. It's accessible. It belongs to the poor. It belongs to, the poor in spirit. And so the kingdom just flips things upside down all the time. And it feels like to me that we're in that space again. Where the empowered structures are sort of like, hey, this is the right way to worship God. Here's, here's who's in, here's who's out. And the kingdom breaking in always has this like disruptive pattern of like, no. The person you said was far away from God is actually the closest, God is near to the brokenhearted, to the persecuted. And those who think that they're like right at the center of God's will actually turn out to be maybe not as near as they thought they were. And so everything gets flipped, right? First will be last, last will be first.
Yeah.
That's
among you,
that's
it will be
kind
different.
of the kingdom breaking in.
Yep. Among you, it will be different. And that's, and so this idea, I get really like emotionally charged and excited about it, of just this idea of when it's not centered on the least, we got to at least go back to the drawing board, because it's been consolidated power. And I think people are seeing this in our churches, because to your point, for a lot of people, this is working. Like for a number of people, this way of doing church is working and consolidating largely political and economic power. And it's benefiting a lot of people who are like, nah, this is perfect. Let's not change this. But to your point of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Jewish religious leaders, like when Jesus came, they had reached that concentration of being wealthy, being, I wouldn't say celebrities, but at least folks in the community that were like looked up to, and they'd consolidated that. And Jesus kind of flips it all and is like, nah, it's not going to be like this. And that is so hard for us to get, especially in America, because of what we value. And we don't value the widow. We don't value the unhoused. We don't value quite as much. And so Jesus being like, no, we got to recenter the kingdom on the vulnerable. It doesn't just make spiritual sense. It actually makes logical sense when you think about what he came to do. So I get excited about that.
Right. Yeah. I had a thought, but missed it. And never mind. It happens to me all the time.
Yeah. Well, hey, sometimes I get to talking. If you think about it, just break in. And so
Yeah.
as the New Wine Collective, right? newwinecollective.org, like
Mm.
what are you hoping to do in
Mm.
this nonprofit organization
Yeah.
to alleviate some of this tension that you've talked about?
Okay. So, man, so it hasn't been that long. It's been about a 2-3 year journey so far,
Okay.
which makes what I'm about to say seem kind of foolish. I would love to create a new system.
Mm,
I don't really. I feel like some people are called to do work in like making the old thing better, right?
right.
And some people can kind of work in that space, and I think that's important and needed. Make the thing better, right?
Mm,
Not make it a little bit more relevant. Make it just work better.
yeah.
I'm of the mind that I think a lot of the problems that we're seeing, they're not just surface level, they're deep and
Mm,
systemic. They're like
mm,
embedded in the actual code, the
yeah.
operating system of the thing. And I think using that idea of an iterative church, right? The church is constantly, living, dying, and giving birth to new life, um, all throughout history.
Yeah.
And so I see this current like model of, Sunday institutional church as sort of like a one big long experiment. And it probably worked at a certain time and place, but I think we're, realizing that it's not applicable, not as relevant to life now.
Yeah.
And so, in my view, we need a new system. And so I'm not suggesting that like I've got the whole system figured out.
Sure.
But I believe in the process of asking the right questions and kind of doing innovation and experimentation so we can figure out what that new system is going to look like.
Yeah.
And so I've got lots of ideas and theories, like a lot of theoretical models
Sure.
that we're waiting to put into practice so that we can learn and iterate on those. So it's more of a, it's not a we have the answers kind of thing. It's more like we're committed to, we want to get this right rather than be right.
Mm,
And so we're going to keep iterating and learning. And perhaps we might have a proposal for, okay, here's a different way to do it. And Lord willing, maybe we can kind of actually see it become reality. And then
yeah.
even then, I'm sure it's going to iterate. It's going to change.
Of course.
So
That's the
does that
only
make sense?
constant, right? Yeah. Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Eugene, that makes a ton of sense of this idea of we're trying a bunch of new things
Mm-hmm.
and in a not a haphazard way, but just testing out these theories of what could work and then trying to put it into practice so that it's at least written down for the next iteration, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure in 50 years, there's going to be somebody else podcasting with the next Eugene Kim, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whoever that is, of like, the way the New Wine Collective set it up, it doesn't make sense for today's whatever. And it's like, yeah,
Amen.
okay, that's the point. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
that's what we should be going for. Right. And so I love the idea that you're coming from curious though, because I'm so skeptical of certainty right now. I'm
Everyone
so
is. Yeah.
skeptical of certainty because
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the smartest people I know, period, plus the smartest people I know about church and theology and all that, don't have a good handle on what is coming next. And then
Mm-hmm.
people outside in society, like people that are just monitoring how the world is going, nobody knows what's coming next.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a time of great uncertainty. So I'm very skeptical of certainty
Mm.
in a moment like this. So I appreciate
Yeah.
your curiosity of trying to go, we're figuring out and we kind of need people to go with us to figure it out. So let's like get more voices in there and try
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Yeah. One thing I want to clarify when I talk about innovation, I don't mean making stuff up.
Yeah.
Just kind of creating things out of nothing.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, like all we're trying to do is really get back to basics.
Mm.
Small relational communities that are face to face. They practice love for God, love for one another, love for neighbor. So in a sense, like you can't get any more old school than that, right?
Right.
It's simple, basic, it's essential church. You know, we're trying to get at what the core of church is without all of the other extra baggage that we kind of pile on. At the same time, so in that sense, what we're proposing is not innovative at all, right? At the same time, we live in a very different age. And the globalization has happened,
Right.
internet has happened, and you realize that was like 30 years ago. Think about that. How crazy,
It's crazy.
30 years, the world has changed, and the internet has changed how we do everything. And so, in my view, it's not the way. It's just my observation. I think there's an opportunity for the church to be and do church in ways that are literally never before possible,
Yeah.
And so I know how audacious it sounds, but, in the way that buildings and pulpits and 501c3 organizations, reshape the way we do church. We didn't have seminaries before. That's a new thing too. It was all new once, right? I think that there is an opportunity for the church to undergo like wide scale change. And it's not going to happen overnight. Obviously, it's going to take a while. But I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But, it's better to sort of try to live into this new future, I think, than to kind of sit back and passively just, do things that we did 50 years ago, even though the world has completely changed.
Yeah. Well, and something that you talked about is the pace of change, because the innovation you're talking about is actually the innovation that the church can undergo is actually pretty rapid, because the internet point, it's been 30 years. Like that's not long. Like it's not long to understand the effects of something. And to your point, like we've been doing this model of church for a really short amount of time, considering that it's a multi-thousand-year-old movement. Plus, if you want to go back to, the Jewish scripture, like since the earth began, like there's thousands of years in this. And so 30 years of internet is different. And so change seems to be able to happen pretty rapidly. And so why wouldn't the church be able to innovate in a way that maybe feels long to us, but is actually really rapid? Is actually something different to change this model. And I honestly, man, I love the audacity. I'm skeptical of certainty, but I love the audacity to say, well, let's try to create a new system. Like let's try. And what's the worst that's going to happen? We're going to learn some really good things. Like it's not going to be worse. I guess it could, right?
It could be.
It could end up being a massive cult leader and all this stuff. I don't think so, just based on our conversation, but it could be worse, but it's more likely when you look at the trajectory of what you're seeing in terms of the spiritual return of the church, right? The spiritual return is a terrible word, but the spiritual state of people that are going in this modern church, trying something new and getting back to basics. Because somebody, I don't know who said it, I think it might have been Gabby Garcia, who I work with, who maybe took it from somebody else, but so much of innovation is doing old things in new ways.
Yes.
And it's like, 70 years ago there was a milkman, and now we have Uber Eats. And it's the same principle. Podcasts, right? We had radio shows in the 1920s. Now we have it's like it is a old thing, right? But it's meeting a need, and that's what you're talking about. If there's not the need for community and face-to-face connection is transcendent. It's not old, it's not new. It is a constant in the life of a human being. And so innovation is just finding different ways to do that. The way that online dating was good for marriage. That's how so many people meet their spouse.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's great. And that digital drives the in-person connection. And
Mm-hmm.
so some of what you're talking about seems to be like, how do we how do we continue to think that way? Like if a spiritual life is built around these basics, how do we utilize what is at our hands, right? What is at our use that we can do to forward that mission?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think there are a lot of people in this space of trying to rethink and reimagine. You know, that's like, it's almost like an overused word at this point. You know, every conference is reimagine this, reimagine that.
Yeah.
You know, that just reinforces like, okay, like there's something happening here, you know? I think what New Wine Collective, what I imagine, you know, the space that we're in, we're trying to do systemic innovation. We're trying to ask the questions of like, what's underneath, you know, what's under the hood? What's, you know, what are the paradigm shifts, not just the pragmatic solutions that we need.
Right.
And so that's kind of where we're starting, down at the roots. I think a lot of people are observing like some of the fruit that has come from, perhaps the U.S. evangelical church hasn't all been good.
Yeah.
And now we realize, okay, well, if this is the fruit, then is the tree sick? If is the tree sick, then where is it sick? Does it go all the way down to the roots? Do we need to sort of look at that and examine? Maybe, and perhaps some are called to just plant new trees, and create new systems, and hopefully learn from the past, learn from some of the things that aren't working, and try to build from the ground up.
Right.
And so that's basically, in a nutshell, what I think we're trying to do. I've been learning a ton, and I actually feel really hopeful. You know, it's easy to get kind of cynical and despair, like, the world's a mess and everything. But I really believe, you know, with faith and hope that God actually is at work in the world. He just might not be working in the most obvious spaces. And so, and we're not obvious, you know, like, you know, I'm nobody, we're nobody, you know, we're all, no one's ever heard of us. So, so we have the freedom to try stuff and fail, you know, it's not much at stake, but a lot to gain if it works.
A ton to gain. So if people are listening to this and they're going, I want to be a part of this. Like, how do I contribute? How do I be a part of this? How do I ask questions? How do I join this idea? Because I think most of the people listening to this podcast are on board with this.
Well, we'll see. Because basically, you know, past few years has been like kind of me and a few, you know, I've had lots of conversation partners, but a lot of this is driven by myself, you know, to be, you know, fully honest. It's just sort of like me working in a cave. My personality. I'm an Enneagram 5. Okay. So I'm sort of like, feel like a mad scientist in a laboratory. And if you look at my, you know, laboratory, it's like all these like test tubes and whiteboards and everything everywhere. We're at a stage where we're like, okay, finally, okay, this is somewhat developed enough to share it,
right,
and put it out there more. But that's not the end. That's just one volley, one part of the conversation. Then the next phase is to invite people into that conversation and see, okay, does this resonate? You know, what's your feedback? Is what works, what doesn't, what resonates, what doesn't. And so we're at that stage where we're beginning to share more of our theory and proposal for a new form of Christianity. And then we expect to kind of hear back from people what people think about it. And we want to actually start putting this into practice. And so we're going to be running experiments and, pre-beta kind of prototyping a lot. Because the end goal is to essentially create a new ecclesiology for the church and then create an online platform that supports that new ecclesiology.
I love that.
As you probably know, building an online platform requires a tremendous amount of resources and expertise. And so we don't want to build something based on the wrong premises. And so we
Yeah.
need to actually test the ecclesiology first, make sure this actually works. People will actually do it. And then we'll, take what we learn and build that into the online platform. So another just clarification. It's not an online church. It's not like just Zoom meetings.
Yep.
It's a really a fundamentally different way of gathering and organizing as the church. And the online platform is just simply a tool that helps facilitate spiritual conversations and community.
Yeah.
The premise is anyone can do church anywhere. I think that's what Jesus came to actually establish. But we've kind of made it into this like very difficult, expensive proprietary thing.
Yeah.
That only a few select individuals with, expertise and privilege can do. But that's not what church is. Church happens anywhere, anytime, where two or more are gathered. And so problem is people don't really know how to do it. And so they need structure and they need resources in order to practice spiritual community.
Right.
So,
man, dude, that's big. Part of what's funny and I'm laughing is because you and I could not be more different in terms of personality. Because if we're doing Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 2. So helper for sure. And wanting to come alongside. But I also, just the way that I am, I'm like, okay, let me try stuff and then I'll build theory from it. Right. Like, and I say
that works too.
Very loosely. Just like, let's try it and see if it works. And then people be like, hey, should we like write any of this down? It's like, yeah, probably. Okay. Like, and so I love the attention to detail and the focus on that. And so I'll send people, go to newwinecollective.org, check it out, sign up for the newsletter. You're doing some cool Third Thursday things where you're like breaking down some concepts and kind of talking about this. And I would love, no matter where you are, like the idea of churches everywhere, right? Not multi-site anymore, but infinite site. I think that's the kind of thinking that is helpful to everybody. Even if you continue to belong to a large mega church where you go on Sunday and you watch a sermon and worship, like nobody's saying there's anything wrong with that if that's working for you. But part of what you're talking about is like, why would it stop there? There's 167 other hours of the week. So why would church stop on Sunday? For an hour or, hour and a half, depending on your denomination, depending on how much the pastor wanted to preach. And so I get excited to invite people into a space where it's at the ground floor, really. Like there's really opportunity to speak into it and it's not all set. And so do check out what Eugene is doing. And it's large, I think you probably have a team building, but I know that a lot of it is self-driven at this point and in your mind.
Yeah, that's a lot of where we're at. We're trying to, over the course of the next few months, really, to slowly reveal and roll out some of the stuff that we've been, processing and thinking about. And so that invitation to kind of, all right, we're starting a conversation here now. Come join the conversation. We want to hear from people. And just see if this has legs and see if there's traction or not.
That's cool. Well, know that I want to be a part of that conversation. I need to catch up to the conversation you're having, by the way. But I am 100% in on this conversation and like really excited about it. Truly excited about it.
I don't know who coined this term, like a mixed ecology. And I really believe that like, the future we want is a healthy mixed ecology. That means there's going to be, Sunday churches, there's going to be house churches, dinner churches. There's going to be, ministries creating content and other tools that are being created. And ultimately it's just sort of like healthy ecology that supports diverse needs of the body. I think that's probably what we all want. What I don't think is necessarily the most helpful is this like one size fits all factory approach to spiritual formation. We were just kind of mirroring capitalism at that point and trying to make everything big and, so I think I'm not proposing like, this is the answer, and now we're going to take over.
Sure.
It's not a competitive thing. It's more, okay, how do we think outside the box? How do we create new forms, new life, new models?
Yeah.
And then we'll see how it all sort of interacts and becomes hopefully sustaining a more sustainable model.
Yeah. Whew.
Anyway, there's a ton to talk about, but
dude, I love it. We got to have more conversations, but for the sake of the
Absolutely.
podcast, we will enter into the one segment that we do on the podcast every single time, and it's the non-judgment zone of joy. And I'm gonna sing maybe like a more like upbeat kind of a song for it today, just because I'm feeling kind of more upbeat and kind of excited. It's the non-judgment zone of joy, the non-judgment zone of joy. We talk about things that are bringing joy. All right. Got it. So, Eugene, what is bringing you joy right now?
John, I was dreading this question the entire time because this is actually a big growth area for me. I am trying to find joy, more and like figure out what brings me joy. I'm generally not a very joyful person. So you said non-judgment. Yeah. I'm testing that theory right now.
No judgment, man. I get it.
I'm working with my therapist and my spiritual director. My therapist has said, okay, Eugene, you have to go out and you have to take a trip all by yourself and just listen to your yum. Listen to your yes and your yum. So I tried that. I took a road trip by myself. I wanted to eat something. I ate it, whatever. And it's all for me to try to like get in touch with, my inner joy, what I enjoy. And so I've been in church ministry for over 25 years. I'm a workaholic. All about like sacrifice. My whole life has been about sacrifice and self-denial. And so this is a huge part of my spiritual like journey. When you ask what brings me joy, I need to discover that joy. And I'm working toward it. So I can say
that's an amazing answer.
Thanks. I can say the pat answers like, oh, my kids bring me joy, spending time with my wife. But like, honestly, this is a deep spiritual question for me. So
yeah. Well, and I appreciate your answer because you took it seriously, right? Of your learning joy. And you're not the only person out there doing that. Learning how to seek joy, learning how to find joy, learning to not deny yourself at the point of harming yourself, of like minimizing yourself, but actually being like, what ice cream do I like? And what do I want to watch on TV? And so that is serious soul work, my dude. And so I just want to commend you for doing it, A, and then B, being like, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing. I want to.
It's a great question.
Wrap my arms around you and say, I hope you continue to find more joy in everything that you do.
I mean, you just happen to hit the deep soul work question that I'm working through right now. And so, you asked a great question. I'm going to carry it with me after this conversation.
Well, I would love to hear more about what brings you joy. Thank you, Eugene, for joining us. Check him out at newwinecollective.org. Subscribe to his newsletters, be a part of it. Man, thanks for coming on and chatting with me.
Thank you so much. This is a great conversation.
Wow. Eugene, man, he just dropped some knowledge. He's a cool dude that I love talking to. I could talk to him for a very long time. And his humility, like I really want to highlight his humility because he was a guy that I think he understands who he is and has a really great self-awareness, but he also cares a lot about people. And so I always hate to say the term former pastor because I feel like for a lot of people, you're always a pastor. You may no longer be employed by a church, but you're always a pastor. That's just something that you are. And I think Eugene is one of those people. Hey, if you want to continue this conversation, you can go to facebook.com/group/better on the inside and join our conversation there. It's a really cool crew we got going. If you want to check out the New Wine Collective, check out his site, newwinecollective.org, and really jump in there and engage with what he has to say. Some of it's really cool stuff. Truly. Hey, I love doing this podcast. I love you guys, and I look forward to seeing what else is going to happen in the conversations we're going to have. Love y'all.